I'm going to state it bluntly, the interstellar object 3 I/ATLAS is not a spacecraft, not an alien probe, not a vessel with intention or engineering. It is, without ambiguity, a natural interstellar comet. I'm saying this up front because over the past months, I've watched a storm of confusion swirl around it. Headlines, conspiracy posts, videos claiming it slows down deliberately, that its tail points in the wrong direction, that a radio spike recorded on November 11th was a greeting. I want to dismantle those misconceptions one by one, not with speculation, but with physics. And ironically, the real story of 3 I/ATLAS is far more beautiful and astonishing than any alien narrative. It is the third confirmed interstellar visitor in human history, discovered on July 1st, 2025, and immediately ignited a global wildfire of curiosity. 70 academic papers, hundreds of telescopic observations, entire online communities tracking every wiggle of its orbit. People were hungry for meaning, as they always are when something arrives from the deep dark between the stars. But meaning must come from reality, not fear or fantasy. The first and most decisive piece of evidence is its orbit. 3 I/ATLAS is on a hyperbolic trajectory, an open curve. That means its velocity is higher than what the sun's gravity can bind. It is literally just passing through. No turning around, no deceleration burn, no orbital insertion. A spacecraft would need the capacity to maneuver, to brake, to adjust, but this object does not. It sails through our system the same way a pebble skims across a pond. When you compute its eccentricity, the value is above 1. Hyperbolic, interstellar, end of story. But people asked, if it's natural, why does it behave strangely? And so I looked at the data. I looked carefully. The first so-called anomaly was its distance. At closest approach, it remained about 270 million kilometers from Earth. That's almost twice the distance from Earth to the Sun at perihelion. Yet I saw comments screaming that it was approaching us, scanning us, heading toward us. That is the power of imagination outrunning mathematics. If a civilization wanted to send a probe here, they wouldn't keep it farther than Mars. They'd come close, observe, maybe even enter orbit. But 3 I/ATLAS doesn't do any of that. It sweeps past us like a stone tossed from another cosmic shoreline, indifferent, unchanging, unreactive. The second cluster of misconceptions revolved around the comet's tail, or rather its elusive tail. Early images showed a stubby, inconsistent plume. Some days it looked visible, then it seemed to vanish, then appear again, sometimes pointed at a strange angle. The conspiratorial mind filled in the gaps. Engines, maneuvers, braking thrusters. But physics provides a simpler, more elegant explanation. The visibility of a comet's tail depends heavily on geometry, the angle between the Sun, the Earth, and the comet itself. If the tail is aligned directly along our line of sight, it can appear faint or even disappear entirely. It's the same reason a long beam of light seems brightest when you view it from the side, and almost non-existent when you look along its axis. And then there's the nature of the ice and dust. Some comets have a hardened crust that delays activity until they are deep into the inner solar system. Others have heavier dust grains, large, dense particles that sunlight can't easily push away. So instead of trailing dramatically behind, the dust sometimes curves or collapses inward toward the sun. None of this is exotic. None of it requires alien engineering. And then came November 11th. Everyone remembers the flare of attention when telescopes finally captured a bright, extended tail erupting from 3 I/ATLAS. For astronomers, this was the expected moment, the comet crossing the threshold where heating becomes efficient. But for conspiracy circles, it became something else entirely. The engines turned on, they said. The ship is waking up. Except what really happened is that the comet finally shed enough gas and dust to become optically dramatic. I watched the raw spectra myself. It was the signature of icy volatiles sublimating. Carbon dioxide, H2O, simple carbon chains, not metal, not exotic propulsion signatures, not anything manufactured. Just sunlight peeling molecules off an ancient, wandering iceberg. The next misunderstanding centered around its color. Some observers noted that the object shifted from reddish tones to a vivid green, and social media spiraled into theories about energy shields, cloaking fields, system resets. But the truth is again grounded in chemistry. As 3 I/ATLAS approached the sun, its surface warmed. The sublimated gases became energized by solar ultraviolet radiation. Among those gases are diatomic carbon molecules, C2. When UV photons strike C2, the molecules fluoresce with a distinctive emerald glow. It's a known phenomenon, it's cataloged. Many comets turn green near perihelion. It didn't change color multiple times. It changed once, gradually, predictably, as it heated. That's not alien behavior, that's thermodynamics. But the final spark, the one that really poured fuel on the fire, was the supposed signal. A brief radio enhancement detected on November 11th, interpreted in some corners as a deliberate broadcast. People messaged me asking whether it was a greeting, a warning, an encoded mathematical message. The reality? A completely natural emission caused when solar radiation cracks water molecules in the comet's coma, producing hydroxyl radicals, OH. These radicals emit a faint but detectable line at 18 centimeters. Every active comet does this. It is literally cometary breathing, not communication, not intelligence, not intention. And so here we are, a hyperbolic traveler, indifferent to us, leaving the solar system by January 2026, never to return. And yet, instead of seeing the wonder of that, of holding data from an object born in another star system, people chased phantoms. But perhaps that tells us something not about the comet, but about ourselves. Our hunger for mystery, our fear of the unknown, our tendency to mythologize what we don't yet understand. Physics cuts through that fog, not to kill the wonder, but to reveal where the real wonder actually lies. When I look at the frenzy surrounding 3 I/ATLAS, I'm reminded of a deeper pattern in human history. Every time something arrives from beyond our familiar borders, we project our fears onto it. A drifting comet becomes an omen. A meteor becomes a warning. An interstellar visitor becomes a probe. What fascinates me is not the object itself, but the psychological vacuum that people rush to fill. Yet the truth, when you examine it through physics, is grounded, consistent, repeatable. And that's exactly what we see with 3 I/ATLAS. The so-called anomalies evaporate when you analyze them with the tools of astrophysics. Nothing mystical, nothing supernatural, nothing engineered, just physics. Take the skepticism surrounding its hyperbolic orbit. Some insisted that the trajectory was too perfect, too smooth, too symmetrical, as if precision itself proved artificiality. But precision is the nature of gravity. When an object travels through interstellar space for millions, perhaps billions, of years without colliding, without significant perturbation, it naturally acquires an astonishing purity of motion. It carries the mathematical elegance of Newton's laws etched into its path. If anything, a highly chaotic or wobbly orbit would make it more suspicious, not less. I've heard people say, but couldn't aliens send something on a hyperbolic path to make it look natural? And to that I say, why? Why waste energy launching an object that never even approaches Earth? If you want to observe a species, you get close, you gather data, you linger. But 3 I/ATLAS never lingers. Its velocity is unyielding, its direction unaltered. It behaves like a stone skimming over a gravitational pond, not like a vessel making decisions. And then there's the fascination with its distance. People wanted it to be closer. They needed proximity to justify the drama. But reality doesn't bend to our narratives. 270 million kilometers is not a reconnaissance pass. It's cosmic indifference. I calculated the gravitational perturbations myself. Nothing in its path suggests an adjustment, a thrust, a correction. No anomalous accelerations, no course deviations. If you place a spacecraft in the solar system, heat dissipation alone gives it a detectable signature. But 3I/ATLAS gives us no such clues. It sails forward at interstellar speed, immune to conspiracy, immune to desire. The tale, however, captured the public imagination more than anything else. A tale that appears, vanishes, reappears at unexpected angles. It's fertile ground for misunderstanding. Some individuals insisted that engines were firing, that the object was turning, that we were witnessing artificial plume patterns. But again, look at the geometry. A comet's tail doesn't follow the comet, it follows the sun. It always points away from the sun because the solar wind, the flow of charged particles, sweeps gas and dust outward. If you stand along that line, the tail becomes invisible, just as a flashlight beam vanishes when you stare directly into it from the source. People said, yeah, but sometimes the tail pointed toward the sun. And that too has a simple explanation. Dust grains can be large, heavy, sluggish. Radiation pressure is not strong enough to push them outward, so they fall inward, curving the dust tail back toward the sun, while the ion tail still flows outward. These are dual tail dynamics we've seen with comets for decades. Nothing in the behavior of 3I/ATLAS violates known physics. We're seeing a performer on a familiar cosmic stage. We just happen to be sitting in a peculiar seat in the theater. The moment the comet brightened in November was inevitable. When a frozen wanderer approaches a star, it wakes up. The heat penetrates deeper into the nucleus. Volatile ices vaporize. Jets erupt through cracks in the crust. To an uninformed eye, sudden activity can look like ignition, like power, like activation. But the spectra tell the truth. They show natural ices and natural dust. Nothing metallic, nothing synthetic. I often say that spectra are the fingerprints of the universe. They don't lie. They don't need interpretation. They reveal exactly what something is made of. And in this case, they reveal nothing more exotic than water, carbon, and dust, ingredients as old as the stars. The question of color is another illusion created by expectation. People expected consistency. They wanted the object to remain the same shade forever. But comets are not static. They evolve as they heat. The green glow that captivated observers wasn't a sign of alien technology. It was carbon molecules fluorescing under ultraviolet light. C2 was first identified in comets nearly 2 centuries ago. When heated, it radiates a ghostly emerald hue. Far from being rare, it's one of the classic signatures of comet activity. But the human mind gravitates toward novelty. When we see something from another star, we assume everything about it must be extraordinary. In truth, 3I/ATLAS behaves exactly like a comet should. And then we return to the radio spike, the supposed signal. The moment that reading went public, I knew what would follow. Claims of messages, hidden codes, alien greetings. But the spike matched the 18-centimeter line of hydroxyl, precisely what we expect when sunlight cracks water vapor in a comet's coma. A natural process, predictable and repeatable. If aliens wanted to communicate, they wouldn't rely on a weak, diffuse chemical emission produced by chance. They would transmit deliberately, powerfully, across a narrow band, something unmistakably artificial. Terrestrial telescopes would detect it instantly. But 3I/ATLAS emits nothing of the sort. It whispers only the faint chemical breath of evaporating ice. For me, the real beauty of this object is its indifference. It does not care who watches, it does not adjust for us, it does not perform. It is a cosmic nomad passing through the solar system on a journey older than our species, older than our sun. And the tragedy is that instead of celebrating that, many chose fear. They chased shadows in the data. They mistook geometry for intention, chemistry for communication, physics for purpose. But we don't need myths to find wonder. The reality is wondrous enough. As I continued examining the data for 3I/ATLAS, I realized that the real challenge wasn't understanding the comet. The real challenge was untangling the human reaction to it. Every scientific explanation seemed to collide directly with an emotional need. The need for significance, for narrative, for a place in a cosmic drama. And when reality didn't cooperate with that hunger, people filled the vacuum with their own stories. But the cosmos doesn't owe us a story. It offers us patterns, laws, forces, and 3I/ATLAS obeys every one of them with unwavering precision. When the comet's tail shifted in unexpected ways, some insisted it was performing maneuvers. They imagined thrusters firing, engines rotating, intentional direction changes. But when you break down the mechanics, nothing could be further from the truth. A comet's tail is a slave to sunlight. It cannot choose its direction any more than a flag can choose the wind. The solar wind presses on the ionized gases, pushing them outward from the sun. Meanwhile, heavier dust grains fall inward or lag behind, depending on their size and speed. If you were to watch two superimposed tails from a particular angle, you might see a twist, a curl, a reversal. But this is like watching smoke swirl in a breeze. It's chaotic but not intelligent. I remember staring at an image taken in early November, one that conspiracy forums love to circle in red, and thinking to myself how easily a lack of context can be misinterpreted as design. The dust tail bent inward because the grains were large and dense. The ion tail curved outward because it was composed of charged particles accelerated by solar wind. When you layer those two motions along a nearly edge-on viewing angle from Earth, the result can mimic a deliberate change in thrust direction. But physics leaves no room for intention here. The forces at play are simple, deterministic, and entirely natural. But to a mind seeking purpose, randomness can look like choice. Then there was the claim that 3I/ATLAS accelerated or slowed unnaturally. I examined those numbers with a level of scrutiny bordering on obsession. Every measurement of its velocity matched gravitational predictions. Every slight variation in brightness corresponded to known patterns of outgassing, microjets of vapor that release as the comet's crust fractures and vents. These jets can create tiny, tiny nudges in acceleration, but nothing even approaching the magnitude of artificial propulsion. They are incidental, they are weak, they are the cosmic equivalent of snowflakes blowing off a drifting iceberg. Yet to some, any deviation became evidence of engineering. They wanted the object to be controlled. They wanted it to be watching us. But the universe doesn't revolve around human desires. I've always believed that scientific literacy isn't just about facts. It's about cultivating the ability to distinguish between what is meaningful and what merely appears meaningful. Humans are pattern-seeking creatures. We search for faces in clouds, messages in noise, symbols in randomness. It's part of our evolutionary wiring. But when we apply that instinct to celestial phenomena without the guardrail of physics, we create illusions. And illusions thrive in the gaps between data points. 3I/ATLAS has plenty of those gaps. It is faint, fast, fleeting. Its behavior is subtle, often lost in background noise. And in that subtlety, imagination takes root. The color transition sparked one of the most dramatic waves of misunderstanding. People couldn't accept that a simple chemical process, C2 fluorescence, could be responsible for such a striking transformation. They wanted something dramatic, something intentional. But the comet didn't activate, it didn't power up, it didn't shift states like a machine, it simply warmed. Carbon chains fluoresced, dust illuminated, nothing more. When you strip away the emotional interpretations, what remains is a predictable thermodynamic evolution. The universe is not trying to communicate with us through colors. It is merely following the rules that govern matter and energy. Even the radio spike, a natural emission of hydroxyl radicals, became a canvas on which people painted whatever story they wanted. I watched individuals decode imaginary messages, claim that aliens were using chemical modulation, insist that the timing was intentional. But the spike wasn't timed, it wasn't shaped, it wasn't modulated. It was a byproduct of sunlight ripping water apart. And if the comet had emitted nothing, the same theorists would have argued that the silence itself was intentional. In other words, the conclusion was decided before the evidence was even examined. This is exactly why interstellar objects are so crucial, not because they bring messages, but because they confront us with our own biases. They force us to confront the limits of our perception. They remind us that not every anomaly is a revelation, not every mystery is a clue, not every unexpected observation is a signal. Most of the time it's simply physics. And physics is beautiful precisely because it does not bend to desire. When I look at 3I/ATLAS, I don't see a machine. I see a relic, a shard of another solar system, forged in the deep cold of a distant star's outskirts. It might have been drifting for eons, untouched, unseen, anonymous. And for a brief moment, just a blink in cosmic time, it passes through our sun's gravitational well and lets us observe it. No message, no mission, just existence. And in that, there is a purity far greater than any imagined alien plot. The universe is grand enough without embellishment. As I followed the trajectory of 3I/ATLAS deeper into the inner solar system, I realized something striking. Each new observation didn't confirm alien engineering, but instead reinforced the astonishing consistency of natural law. The closer we looked, the more ordinary yet profound the object became. Its behavior fit perfectly into the spectrum of known comet activity, and that alone should inspire awe. To witness an object from another star obey the same principles that govern our own comets is a reminder that physics is universal. The cosmos is not chaotic, it is coherent. It is ruled by forces that apply equally in every corner of the galaxy. But many observers weren't satisfied with that. They were hungry for rupture, for the extraordinary, for something that shatters our understanding. And so each normal fluctuation became a portal for speculation. The faint brightening of the nucleus became a power surge. The shift in tail alignment became a reorientation. The periodic emission lines became calms. And I found myself thinking how fragile our relationship with evidence becomes when expectation overrides curiosity. People do not analyze the data, they project onto it. The supposed engine plume claims were perhaps the most persistent. One frame taken by an amateur astronomer showed a narrow spike of brightness extending from the nucleus. Immediately, someone labeled it a thruster burn. The image went viral. But when you overlay the frame with solar wind direction at that exact moment, the spike aligns perfectly with the ion tail. It was simply the comet venting volatile gases along the direction where sunlight struck a fresh fracture in the crust. Jets like these are common. They can even produce localized bursts that briefly alter the comet's rotation, tiny, harmless changes that conspiracy theorists misread as deliberate maneuvers. And then came the argument that no natural comet can survive interstellar space without erosion. I heard that one repeated endlessly. But comets aren't fragile snowballs drifting through warm currents. In the deep cold between stars, temperatures approach absolute zero. Activity ceases. Chemical reactions freeze. Erosion halts. A comet can drift for millions, even billions of years without significant loss of mass. In fact, the very stillness of interstellar space preserves these objects. They are time capsules. They are archives. Their silence is not a sign of engineering. It is a sign of ancient origin. Another idea circulated claiming that 3I/ATLAS adjusted its luminosity in response to Earth's observation. That one, I admit, bordered on poetic. An interstellar visitor blinking back at us as we watched. But comets don't respond to the gaze of telescopes. They brighten in proportion to their distance from the sun and the efficiency at which sublimation occurs. If the crust fractures unevenly, brightness jumps. If exposed ice reverts to shadow, brightness dips. It's not communication, it's not awareness, it's the simple dance between heat and ice. When the bright green coma finally expanded to several tens of thousands of kilometers, the excitement surged again. Observers insisted the color was changing too quickly to be natural. But if you track the timing of the color shift against the comet's thermal curve, the transition is exactly where we expected it. As sunlight penetrates deeper, it releases carbon-rich volatiles that had been frozen solid for eons. Those molecules scatter and fluoresce in the ultraviolet spectrum. And there it is, the emerald glow that fuels imagination. But imagination is not evidence. Chemistry is. I remember reviewing rotational light curves during this phase, expecting the usual irregularities common in elongated nuclei. The curves were messy, uneven, unpredictable, and that alone was decisive. Machines do not tumble chaotically. They stabilize, they correct, they maintain vectors. But natural comets rotate with wobble and precession, shaped by outgassing events and surface asymmetries. 3I/ATLAS tumbled like a fragment of rock and ice because that's exactly what it was. The radio spike, resurfacing again and again in online debates, took on a life of its own. People speculated about modulated pulses, frequency hopping, encoded patterns. So I looked at the raw spectral line, just noise around the 18-centimeter hydroxyl band. It was messy, broad, diffuse, lacking structure. No narrowband signature, no repeating pattern, no carrier wave. A real signal would stand out like a lighthouse beam in the fog. But this was fog, random, natural, expected. Solar photons dissociate water molecules, hydroxyl radicals radiate. That's it. The more data we gathered, the more the comet transformed from a mystery into a lesson, one that extends far beyond astrophysics. It showed us how quickly misunderstanding flourishes when we lack the patience to let evidence speak. It exposed how easily we mistake coincidence for communication. And it reminded me that sometimes the most remarkable revelation is that the universe behaves exactly as it should. As the comet accelerated past perihelion, its fate became clear. It was already on its way out, its hyperbolic path carrying it back into interstellar darkness. No looping return, no orbital capture, no slingshot maneuver toward Earth. Its speed was too great, its trajectory too open. It would never come back. And that truth carries a quiet weight. We are witnessing something we will never see again. A wanderer from another star system passing briefly through our own before vanishing forever. People spent months asking whether it carried a message. But it did carry something, just not the message they were looking for. It carried evidence that the laws of physics stretch unbroken across the galaxy. It carried proof that nature is enough. And perhaps the greatest tragedy is that some overlooked that wonder in their search for something artificial. As 3I/ATLAS drifted farther from the sun, its glow softened, its tail thinned, and its coma collapsed back into silence. The frenzy around it quieted too, as if people slowly realized that the extraordinary object they had feared or mythologized was already leaving, indifferent to everything projected onto it. I watched its fading arc with a strange mixture of relief and melancholy, not because it was alien, but because it was a visitor we had only just begun to understand. And like Oumuamua and Borisov before it, it reminded us how brief and fragile our opportunities for observation truly are. Interstellar objects do not linger. They do not come back. They pass through once, offering clues, but withholding their full story. So as 3I/ATLAS fades into the abyss, I leave you with this. The universe is filled with mysteries, but not every mystery is a message. Sometimes a comet is just a comet. Sometimes the truth is not hidden behind layers of conspiracy. It is written plainly in the equations that govern motion, heat, light, and chemistry. And sometimes the most beautiful revelation of all is that the cosmos operates without intention, without design, yet with perfect elegance. 3I/ATLAS came from another star. It passed through our system. It left. And in doing so, it showed us that we don't need aliens to feel awe. The universe itself is enough.